Are you struggling to make sense of what was done to you? Here, you will find many details to help you to understand so that you can get them out of your head and out of your life. Welcome to Psycho Begun. Hi there, I'm David McDermott, and I want to have a close look at this idea of oversharing as a result of having been in an abusive relationship, whether that's with a psychopath, a sociopath, or a narcissist. Many people, when they come out of an abusive relationship and they recognize it as such, often have this desire to speak out about what was going on and how they were treated. The sense of injustice can be very strong. The problem is they may end up oversharing. This can be a problem in two ways: giving away too much information about themselves, or talking non-stop about the situation to the point where it gets boring or distressing to those around them. Why does it happen? Some people say that the victims have been repressed and unable to speak about the situation for such a long time that when they have the opportunity to talk, they grab it with both hands. And indeed, there seems to be some merit in this idea. However, it doesn't explain everything. So, for example, there are people who've been through prolonged trauma, such as wars or hostage situations, and oftentimes they actually speak very little about their experience. Some may even refuse to speak about it at all. So it can't be just the trauma that forces people to want to talk about it. There are even some people who leave abusive relationships or cults without recognizing the nature of the relationship, and they don't want to spend time thinking about that time, let alone talk a lot about it. So there must be something else going on, and indeed there is, something more sinister. The fact is that part of the programming of the psychopaths and narcissists is to train people to reveal information about themselves. Now, information control is one of the pillars of mind control. These types know how important information is. Information is power and all that. The idea is that the more information these people have, the easier it is to control and manipulate the people around them. So as I say, they train people to reveal stuff about themselves. Now, this very often starts in the first minute. I mentioned before about the idea that after a relationship, some people overshare. However, this oversharing occurs in the relationship as well. Many people in abusive relationships or cults or situations like this will very often say that nobody has known them like the manipulator. They've never shared so much with one person as they did with the cult leader, or the partner knew everything there was to know about them. So how did this happen? How did the manipulator get people to reveal all the stuff about themselves? Well, at the very start of the relationship, part of the love bombing is making the person feel special. The manipulators will very often ask many questions about the person, and for the victim, this seems fantastic. Somebody's interested in them. Somebody's asked them a question about themselves. And in general, people like to talk about themselves. So, well, the victims will quite willingly answer these questions. The manipulators will pay very close attention to everything that the person is saying, and very often the questions they ask can be quite intimate. They will ask about people's wants, needs, desires, fears, weaknesses, strengths, fantasies, and all this kind of stuff. Why? Because they're gathering information about this person that they intend to use against them later on. A good general rule is that anything you say to a psychopath or a narcissist can and will be used against you at any time of their choosing. Very often at some point in the relationship, the victim realizes that if they tell the manipulator things, they're going to get into trouble. And therefore they begin to shut down, they begin to stop talking. This is basically starving the manipulator of information. However, this does not go unnoticed by the manipulator, and for them, this is just not going to fly. They will use various tactics to get the person talking again. For example, one of the things they'll do is they'll accuse the victim of withholding information. Oh, you're making decisions without me. I don't feel part of this relationship anymore. You don't tell me what's going on. People generally want other people to think well of them. And remember, the victim is also programmed to keep the manipulator happy. So what do? They begin to reveal information as a way to prove that they're not actually doing the things they're being accused of. In those moments, they will often overshare as well. Another tactic is to call the victim a liar. You're telling me lies. You withhold information from me. I don't know what's going on. Again, no normal, healthy person wants to be known as a liar. So what do? They give away lots of information to try and prove to the manipulator that they're not lying, that they're actually giving them all the information. Another trick of the manipulators is to start an argument. Why? Because people will often reveal stuff when they're angry during an argument that they might not otherwise say. One teenager told me that her narcissistic father came into her bedroom and for no obvious reason started an argument, and he was shouting different things. He started firing questions at her. As she was answering, in her head, she's thinking to herself, oh, maybe I shouldn't be saying this. As soon as the sentence was out of her mouth, her narcissistic father looked at her, turned around and walked out. And she said, oh, I felt like that was the information he was looking for, and once he had it, there was no need to continue the argument. Well, she was absolutely right. He got what he wanted, mission accomplished, no need for the argument anymore. In all these ways, the manipulator is training their victims to reveal things about themselves. And remember, this idea that the victim is also trained to please the manipulator. So the manipulator or the victim learns that, giving away information is what's done. The manipulator at different stages of the relationship wants to have information about your feelings, your thoughts, your actions, where you were, who you were with, what you discussed, and so on. Now, in other videos, I explained about this idea of pseudo-personalities, where the manipulator imposes a false personality on the victim. Links in the description below, obviously. So what happens is, the victim becomes programmed in certain ways. They are programmed to believe the manipulator. They are programmed to trust the manipulator. They are programmed to put the wants and needs of the manipulator ahead of their own. They are programmed to keep the manipulator happy and to avoid arguments. So in this way, when the tactics I've mentioned are layered upon this idea, when the victim ends up revealing all sorts of things to the manipulator that they might not otherwise reveal. In other words, there's actually no privacy in the abusive relationship. The abused person is not allowed to keep any secrets. Why is this important? The idea is that the manipulator knows everything there is to know about their victim. This is one of the factors involved in the sense of identity of the victim becoming enmeshed with that of the manipulator. The victim feels, well, this person knows everything about me. There's nothing that they don't know about me. I have nothing to hide. The victim loses a sense of where they stop and where the manipulator starts. So people have a sense of losing themselves in the relationship, saying that they don't know who they are anymore. This is closely tied into the fact that the manipulator knows all there is to know about the victim. The manipulator's knowing everything means that the victim very often feels shameful, feels inferior to the manipulator, because the manipulator knows everything about them, good and bad. Now, of course, all that bad is absolutely used against the victim, to guilt trip them, make them feel fear. Well, that's a topic for another time. The same training to reveal personal data also occurs in cults. In personal development groups, for example, when the group tools and tactics are being taught, what happens is there's often a group demonstration where one volunteer comes to the front and they talk about a problem they have, and then the technique is applied to help them overcome the problem. Then people divide up into groups of 3 or 4, say, and each person has a go, picking a personal problem, applying the technique under the guidance of the small group, and noticing how things have improved. They think they are learning about how to improve their lives. Something that they are not aware of is that they are revealing their personal details, often quite intimate details, to complete strangers. In this way, the process of exposing themselves to the group becomes normalized. And once again, the group gets to learn all about the problems and difficulties of each member. No privacy, all over again. The same thing happens in religious groups and other groups where there are sharing sessions. People talk about their past and their problems. The members of these groups will often say that they feel like they've met people who get them, people who feel like family, like brothers and sisters, people who they share so much in common with. This is one of the tricks of the cults, causing the identities of the members to become enmeshed with that of the group. So, what happens when the person actually leaves the abusive environment? Well, in the videos about pseudo personalities, I've explained how the pseudo personality persists even after a person leaves the mind control situation. The patterns of behavior, the patterns of thinking, they keep running. This idea of giving other people information is deeply ingrained and it also persists. This is a very significant factor in the idea that people will reveal all sorts of things about themselves once they're out of the relationship and they recognize it as abusive. Does it happen that somebody leaves an abusive relationship and then starts oversharing? No. There are other factors that complicate the situation. Most people who've been manipulated have learned along the way that you don't talk about the abuser to outsiders. This happens in abusive relationships, in cults, in toxic families. I'm not going to go into the details now, but suffice it to say that people feel they will somehow be betraying the manipulator if they tell outsiders what was really going on. This is very important, for example, where there's physical violence or sexual abuse. People feel they are partly to blame for what went on and are very reluctant to speak up because of this, certainly initially. People often think that when they leave the mind control situation that things will be much better. Oftentimes, things are the complete opposite. If you've left such a situation yourself, you will know what I'm talking about. People can be shocked coming out of an abusive relationship. They can be stunned. They can have lots of confusion, lots of upset. They think they're responsible for much of what happened. They have lots of contradictory thoughts. Their thoughts contradict their emotions. It's all extremely disturbing and disconcerting. There may be a lot of fear in place, in which a person may be very afraid of talking out about the manipulator because of potential consequences. Some people are so shocked that it takes them weeks or months to figure out what went on and even to admit to themselves that they were in an abusive situation. If someone does not realize they were in a cult or an abusive relationship, which is much more common than you think, then there are a couple of options. Some people who recognize that there was something wrong but are not sure at all about it often try and forget about the situation and try and pick themselves up and carry on. They may be very reluctant to talk about it, chalking it up to their partner being a bit strict or not liking the group leader, but the ideas of the group being valuable and things of this nature. The second group of people who leave a cult, for example, but who literally have no idea it was a cult, will very often go cult hopping, ending up in similar groups, and they will continue the pattern of sharing and all sorts of things with others. They may be blissfully unaware of what they're doing, and the information they share is used against them by the next manipulator they cross paths with. So, as you can see, the oversharing may not start straight away. A victim can be in no state or mood to talk to others about their experience initially. But later on, when somebody starts into some kind of recovery process and they do realize what's going on, very often the floodgates open and all of a sudden they're talking to anybody and everybody about what was done to them. Now, one of the obvious dangers is, for example, somebody sitting in a coffee shop. The person is really upset about a recent breakup. Somebody approaches them, "Are you okay?" And the person goes, yeah, I'm fine." "Well, you don't look okay." "Oh, well, I just broke up with my boyfriend." And the stranger goes, "Oh, I'm in the same boat. Same thing happened to me." And they sit down, and all of a sudden, this poor victim has a friendly ear, somebody who supposedly has been in the same situation, and they start talking and talking and talking. The difficulty is, if this new person is another manipulator, then the victim is giving this new person all the information they need to pick up where the last one left off. And if the person gets involved in the relationship, 6 months later, 6 years later, the person realizes, oh, here we go again, another bad relationship. Another issue, as I've said, is the fact that if a victim is talking about this all the time, this kind of thing gets old for people around. It can get old very quickly. People will be thinking, oh, get over it already. You're out of the relationship. Just forget about it. She is no longer controlling you. Just move on. Live your life. But if you've come out of an abusive relationship, you know just how impossible that is. Having somebody just tell you to do something, or even telling yourself to do something, is not enough to unwind the patterns of behavior and thinking that have been put in place by the manipulator. So, for example, people saying, oh, don't overshare, don't tell so much, just don't speak so much about yourself. It's not enough for people to be able to do the not oversharing thing. The patterns of behavior that were put in place by the manipulator run extremely deep. Again, I'm not going to go into that right now, but that'll be a subject for another time. So what can you do about it? Well, the idea is to understand how these patterns of behavior were put in place. What did the manipulator do and say to you to force you into revealing these things about yourself? One woman said that she was brought up in an abusive family and she was led to believe that this is how you make friends. You tell the other person every single thing about yourself. And she said now she understands why people used to look at her strangely when she was revealing personal issues about herself. But she firmly believed that this is how you make friends. The trick is to understand what was done to you, how it was done. How did they get you to the point where you believed that revealing these things was a good thing, was an appropriate thing? Only then do people develop options in terms of how to respond in particular situations. Now, obviously, this takes time. So, is there a shortcut? Well, in this case, there is. One of the things you do is you decide here and now how much you're going to reveal about yourself to other people. Obviously, if you've spoken to lots of people already, there's nothing you can do about that. You can't take the information back. But certainly with new people or people you're not very familiar with, how much are you going to reveal about yourself to these people? So what happens is, when you're talking to people or you meet somebody new, you've already decided how much or how little you're going to reveal. So you don't have to decide in the moment. Is this foolproof? I'm afraid not. You may still make mistakes. Sometimes people will still overshare because, again, the pattern of programming runs so deep that until that deep pattern is disassembled, there may be problems. So how much do you tell people? Well, for new people, my suggestion is to tell them as near zero as you possibly can. They don't need to know about your past. They don't need to know you've been in an abusive relationship. Do you actually want them thinking about you like that? Or do you actually want them thinking about you as the person you really are? If you're getting rid of this pseudo personality and you're developing your own personality, you don't want the person to think of you as someone that you were 10 years ago. The fact is, you're not obliged to tell people everything about yourself. Some think that they owe it to a new person or a new partner to let them know that they've been in an abusive situation before. Consider that this is part of the programming that you've been subjected to. You are not obliged to reveal everything to a new partner. You are absolutely allowed to keep things to yourself. This is something the victims of narcissists and psychopaths often have to relearn, or even learn for the first time. Recognizing that as part of the program that was imposed upon you is important. Very often it feels good for the person to reveal all this kind of stuff. Why? Because that's what they've been trained to believe is the correct thing to do. So they have a sense of satisfaction, a sense of doing the right thing. Whereas in fact, it only benefits the manipulator. If the manipulator has all the information about you, then it makes it easier for them to control and dominate you. Another interesting thing too is to think about how much you actually know about your manipulator. Very often it's shocking to people to realize they actually know very, very little. They know very little about this person they've been married to for 10, 15, 20 years. This oversharing is one of those patterns that people do have to pay attention to. It takes effort, it takes time, it takes work to undo it. As people learn about mind control, there's lots of behavioral patterns that just simply melt away because they recognize the techniques that were used to manipulate them. But this particular one is one that people have to pay attention to. If you slip up, well, you've slipped up. You use it as a learning experience. The next time, you'll say less. But you know it's very difficult. As I say, it's one that people have to pay particular attention to. The most important thing is to undo all the programming that the manipulator imposed upon you. Because if you don't, not only will this oversharing pattern continue, but all the other patterns that you're not aware of will also be running in the background. And these things, remember, they were put in place for the benefit of the manipulator, not for your benefit. And if they're running in the background, they will lead you into difficulties. Okay, if you want to know about more mind control, please have a look at some more videos. My website is psychobegone.com, and you can learn more details about mind control tactics and techniques, the motivations of the manipulators, getting them out of your life, what a full recovery entails, and such things. Oh, and I need to mention about all the buttons and stuff. You know what to do. Thanks. Mind yourself. Take care.